Where are you?
Emily first saw him on a chilly October morning. She was sipping her coffee at the corner cafe near her apartment, watching the city wake up. People rushed past, heads buried in their phones, the scent of rain still lingering in the air from the night before. That was when she noticed him. He stood across the street, motionless. A tall man in a long gray coat, his hands buried deep in his pockets. His face was eerily expressionless, his eyes locked onto her. At first, Emily thought he was just another passerby, lost in thought. But when she glanced up from her phone minutes later, he was still there, staring. He didn't blink, not once. A chill ran down her spine. She forced herself to look away, shaking off the unease. Maybe he was looking at something behind her, or maybe she was overthinking. Still, when she got up to leave, she couldn't resist one last glance over her shoulder. He hadn't moved. The next morning, Emily saw him again. This time, he stood at the entrance of her subway station, his gaze fixed on her. Panic bubbled in her chest, but she told herself it was just a coincidence. New York was filled with strange people, but as days passed, she realized it wasn't a coincidence at all. She saw him outside her office, at the grocery store, even on her quiet street at night, always watching, never blinking. Emily confided in her best friend Lisa over drinks. "It's probably just some creep," Lisa said. "Ignore him." Emily nodded, but deep down she knew there was something unnatural about him. People blink, they shift, they breathe, but not him. One evening, Emily left work late. The office had emptied, and the air outside was thick with the smell of damp asphalt. As she walked toward the subway, she felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck. She turned. He was there, standing under a flickering street lamp. Her breath hitched. This time, something was different. He wasn't just watching. He took a step forward. Emily's instincts screamed at her to run. She darted down the stairs into the subway station, her heart pounding. The platform was nearly empty. She checked over her shoulder. He was there, descending the stairs slowly, methodically. The train roared into the station, and she leapt inside just as the doors shut. Relief flooded her. She was safe, until she saw him through the window. He was still on the platform. But as the train pulled away, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at her reflection. Emily barely slept that night. She locked every door, closed every blind, but still felt watched. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of unblinking eyes and whispers she couldn't understand. Desperate for answers, she started researching cases of people being followed. Nothing quite matched her experience until she stumbled upon an old newspaper article from 1956. The headline read, "Mysterious Deaths Linked to the Man Who Never Blinks." Her blood ran cold as she read about a series of disappearances. Each victim had reported being followed by a man who never blinked. Police dismissed the cases as hysteria, but the victims all vanished without a trace. The last person to report seeing him, a woman who lived in Emily's apartment. Emily decided she wouldn't run anymore. She needed to face him. That night, she sat in her living room, every light on, waiting. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Just as her eyes grew heavy, a faint tap echoed from her window. Her stomach twisted. Slowly, she turned. He was there, not outside, inside. He stood in the dim light of her apartment, his expression still blank, his eyes unblinking. Frozen in terror, she couldn't scream, couldn't move. Then he took a step forward. Emily scrambled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. "What do you want?" she choked out. Silence. His lips didn't move, but she heard the words all the same, a whisper inside her mind. "I watch, I wait, I take." Her vision blurred. Darkness crept in at the edges. The last thing she saw before everything went black were his eyes, cold, bottomless, never blinking. The next morning, Lisa knocked on Emily's door. No answer. Concerned, she let herself in. The apartment was empty. No sign of a struggle, no note, nothing. Lisa turned to leave, but then she saw something on the window pane. Something that hadn't been there before. A smudged handprint. and just below it, two words scrawled in the condensation, "Still watching."
Where are you?
Daniel moved into the old apartment on Maple Street with high hopes. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood quiet, and the view from the window overlooked a peaceful park. It seemed perfect. But on the very first night, he heard the whispers. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. A soft murmur, distant, like a conversation happening just beyond the walls. He pressed his ear against the plaster, but there was nothing. When he turned away, though, the whispers returned, closer. The next few nights, it got worse. The whispers didn't just drift through the walls. They seemed to come from inside the room itself. Words were indistinct, breathy, as if someone stood right behind him, speaking just below the threshold of understanding. Daniel tried to reason it away. Old buildings made noises. Maybe it was a vent, or his tired mind playing tricks. But deep down, he knew better. Especially when the whispers began to say his name. One night, unable to take it anymore, he recorded the room while he slept. The next morning, with shaking fingers, he played back the audio. There was silence at first, then faintly a voice. "Daniel, don't turn around." Terrified, Daniel searched the apartment's history. It had been vacant for years. Before that, a man named Thomas Bell had lived there, until he was found dead in the very same bedroom. The coroner's report listed no cause, no wounds, just dead, eyes wide open, as if he had seen something horrible in his final moments. Determined to fight back, Daniel called in a paranormal investigator. The woman arrived with strange equipment and a solemn expression. As she walked through the apartment, she froze in the bedroom. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not alone." She turned on a device and the whispers amplified, filling the air. One phrase repeated over and over. "He is still here." That night, Daniel packed his things. He didn't care about the deposit. He needed to leave. As he stuffed clothes into his suitcase, he heard it again. The whisper. "Don't turn around." Daniel's breath hitched. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to obey. But something inside, curiosity, defiance, forced him to look. In the mirror, he saw himself, and standing right behind him, a shadowy figure with hollow, staring eyes. The whispers exploded into a scream, and then silence. Days later, the landlord entered the apartment after receiving no response from Daniel. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. The only sign of anything wrong was the mirror, shattered from the inside, and faintly on the recording device left behind, a whisper. "He is still here."
Where are you?
Mia always had an odd relationship with mirrors. Ever since childhood, she felt something was just slightly off. A trick of the light, she told herself. A small delay in her reflection's movement. Nothing to worry about. But one night, she discovered she was wrong. It happened late one evening. She had just finished brushing her teeth and turned to leave the bathroom. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something that made her freeze. Her reflection hadn't moved. It still stood facing the mirror, staring straight ahead while Mia had already turned away. Her heart pounded as she forced herself to look back. Now the reflection followed her movements perfectly. Had she imagined it? A trick of exhaustion? She shook her head and went to bed, determined to forget the unsettling moment. Over the next few days, she began to notice more inconsistencies. Her reflection blinked at the wrong time, smiled when she wasn't smiling. One morning she yawned, and for a split second, her reflection grinned. Fear gnawed at her. She avoided mirrors as much as possible, but the presence always loomed just beyond her vision. At night, she covered her bedroom mirror with a sheet. Still, she could feel it watching. One evening, she gathered the courage to test it. She held up her right hand. Her reflection hesitated. A shudder ran through her as she stepped forward. Slowly, she reached out to touch the glass. Her fingertips met the cold surface. Then her reflection smiled. Mia bolted from the bathroom, her heart hammering. She had to get out of the house. She grabbed her keys, but as she reached the front door, she caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. Her reflection wasn't mirroring her anymore. It was standing still, staring at her, tilting its head ever so slightly. Then it lifted its hand and tapped the glass from the inside. A slow, deliberate knock. Mia ran. She didn't stop until she was at her friend's apartment, breathless and trembling. She refused to go home. But the next morning, she received a text from an unknown number. "You left me behind." Determined to end this nightmare, Mia returned home. The house was silent, the mirrors all uncovered. Steeling herself, she stepped in front of the bathroom mirror. Her reflection stood there, waiting. "I know you're not me," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. The reflection tilted its head again, then smiled. "I know." And then it reached forward. Mia screamed as the cold fingers wrapped around her wrist. The glass rippled, and before she could pull away, her reflection yanked her inside. The mirror stilled. The reflection smoothed its hair, adjusted its expression, and turned away from the glass, stepping into Mia's world. And Mia? She was trapped inside, pounding on the glass, screaming without a sound, as her reflection walked away, never looking back.